All right, well, good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining. This is probably the most interestingly named session in the catalog because we're actually, well, it's Minecraft, right? Who would have thought you'd come to VMware Explore and it's like, oh, there's a session about Minecraft. Well, it's kind of about Minecraft, but not quite, and I'll tell you why in a second. So first, I just want to introduce myself. My name's Sean Massey. I'm a staff multi-cloud architect in the VMware multi-cloud strategy and architecture team. Normally, I work kind of in that space between our multi-cloud solutions and our end-user computing solutions. VCDX and contact information down there in the bottom. So I'm going to start with the question, right? Like, why do we build VM templates, right? As a sysadmin or a VI admin, right? Why do we use that feature where we can go into vCenter and right-click and go deploy from template? So there's a couple of reasons for this, right? We want to speed up our deployments, right? We want to provide a level of consistency, and we don't want to sit there or have our sysadmins sit there all the time with a Windows ISO or a Linux ISO manually installing it, which then ends up with us not getting the first two benefits. Because doing anything manually is slow and it's error prone, and you don't get the same results one time after another. And in a lot of organizations I've worked for or with, they've built templates by hand. So the problem with this is that when you build them by hand, you're not maintaining them on a regular basis, right? Because you built it once. You don't want to have to open it up again. You don't want to have to manually install Windows updates. And over time, you get problems with drift, right? What you get in the template is not what your standard should be. You may have, well, it might be a little bit better now that Microsoft has gone down to like one patch per month. That's just like this giant blob. But it still takes forever to download and install, even if you have like a WSUS server. And then if you start deploying additional third-party components, they might not be there because you don't update your templates for them. So you get this consistency problem over time. Now, if we think about the public cloud, this isn't the experience we get. When you go into Amazon or into Azure or whatnot, there's a catalog for you. You could just pick the image you want. Even our VMware Cloud Provider Program partners who are using CDS and VCD have these catalogs of things that you can just select and deploy. Now, the thing about these is these are built or rebuilt on a regular basis, in some cases daily. And if you look at the Azure catalog or the AWS catalog, some of them may have frameworks installed with them, right? They may have .NET or SQL Server or other components that you might use. Now, these might not fit your enterprise environment, or they might not have everything your enterprise needs, but you can create your own templates from them as well and add your own stuff to them. And in the end, all your application or sysadmins need to do is push a button, and they're 90% of the way to where they need to be. So I can hear it already, right? What does this have to do with Minecraft, right? How do I tie this back to that? So there's three things about Minecraft that kind of make it like an enterprise application. Now, first off, it has an SLA, and for anyone who has kids, when your Minecraft isn't working, you hear about it, and you hear about it quickly. I've had times where I've had calls and I'm halfway across the country going, you need to fix this now. The kids are driving me nuts. Second, it requires some arcane knowledge to actually get it up and running and configured. Some things are in some text-based config files, some things are done through a remote console, and some things are configured in JSON, right? It's like who was developing that feature that day and what they liked, and that's how it ended up in it. And I know more than a few enterprise applications that are that way. And finally, it requires Java. Like every other big enterprise app, Java is a dependency. Now, I know some people are like, well, what about Bedrock? But if you're using something that's not Windows-based, you probably need Java Edition, so you need Java. And unfortunately, yeah. So this kind of became a project for me because in my home lab, right, there's a bunch of things I want to do, and in the end, it really became a dumping ground for Minecraft servers for my kids. And like, my kids are obsessed with Minecraft. It's like the one game they play all the time. And when they got into this during COVID as a way to kill time, I decided that I wanted to build servers for them because they were using some older machines that, you know, could die any day. I didn't want to have to deal with backing up their worlds and migrating it to a new machine if they had problems. So putting it on a dedicated VM was a great way to maintain that. It also means if they don't do their chores or listen or you know, the things that we ask, it's very easy to take it away. And in theory, it allows my kids to cooperatively play, but you probably already know how that goes. But the problem with having servers is that they can be a pain to maintain, right? Because now I'm introducing an enterprise problem into my home network, and in some cases, I'm turning myself into a cloud provider. Because I was being asked to build a lot of Minecraft servers. They'd see a YouTube video and go, oh, we want to try that world seed, or we want to do this thing that they're doing and whatnot. So it became kind of a chore. So I decided I wanted a way to automate this and, in theory, make it a little bit more self-service, right? I didn't want to be doing this by hand every time they were asking for something. And I wanted kind of a cloud-like experience where I can just go in there and deploy it and, you know, not have to touch a CLI to configure things. But I also wanted this to be self-maintaining, right? There are a lot of Minecraft updates. There's like multiple patches per year. There's multiple releases per year. There's Linux updates. God knows there's a ton of Java updates. Right, so I didn't want to have to be touching that and maintaining that for every new server. Now, there are other ways to do this, right? There's a Docker container, there's Kubernetes. I really wasn't ready for that in 2020. I didn't want to learn that at the time. And there were other orchestration tools I could have used, but again, there was a time thing. I didn't want to learn it, right? I admit I was being lazy in one sense and not lazy in another. The eventual goal was to give my kids something that they could go in theory, to vCenter and just deploy with no additional orchestration, no additional config management tools. But there's an additional challenge here. The Minecraft EULA actually says I can't redistribute it. So I have to somehow bake that into this, whatever I do, where it would download it automatically. Well, that was great in theory. But I'm not going to give a 13-year-old access to vCenter to deploy things. So I just really wanted to make this easier for myself. Now, maybe someday I'll have Cloud Director in my home lab, and then I'll let them do it. But that's not anywhere near happening right now. So I went through and I started this whole project, and I was able to get to an end result. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what I learned first before I actually show you kind of what the outcome was. Now, when coming up with an automation project for building templates, the right tooling is essential. There's a lot of options out there. There's a lot of different ways to script things. There's a lot of, if you're working with Microsoft products, there's things like MDT. But I chose Packer. HashiCorp's Packer tool. No. Being from Wisconsin, I have to call out, I did not pick this Packer. Sit down, Mike. But I picked Packer because, in the end, it's multi-platform, right? I can run the tool on Linux or Windows or Mac. I can support multiple cloud endpoints. So whatever I wanted to do, the tool was flexible enough to do it and test from both my dev environment and in some sort of semi-production environment. And it's multiple OS. So I could work with Windows. I could work with Linux, right? I'm an EUC guy by trade, so every second Tuesday of the month, there's a good chance I might want to do something like this for my Windows templates as well. It's all text-based, right? Originally JSON, now there's a domain-specific language that gets used for the config files, and because it's all text-based, it works really well with source control. That also means there's a lot of examples out there, but this is kind of a double-edged sword, and this is something I struggled with, and I'll come back to that point in a little bit. What's also nice about Packer is it lets me orchestrate everything in one tool, right? I don't need to tie together multiple tools to build this workflow to get my end result. I do it all in one. So my VM hardware configs, my OS install, I can create in-guest scripts to install my applications and do my configurations. I can even do things post-provisioning. So I can create my OVA file, inject all my properties, and I can do all this and use variables to create multiple builds and multiple deployment models. So I ended up using Packer for everything. Linux, anything I do Linux-based, I end up building a Packer template for. Windows Server and Windows Desktop. So I'm going to talk about how I actually use this for Minecraft in particular, because I put Minecraft in the name, I might as well focus on that. So one of my colleagues, Timo Sigliani, has a GitHub repo that he published that has Debian templates. And I started with Debian. Well, I didn't start with Debian. I moved to Debian, partially because Timo had done the hard work, right? I'm building on the shoulders of others here. That will handle the base Debian install. And I apologize, I did not include a link to that repo in here or a QR code to that, but I will get that published out on LinkedIn and elsewhere. Once I have Debian installed, I have scripts that will go through, configure Debian for the way I want it, and install all my prerequisites. So I need some PowerShell for this. I need Java for this. I need to set up all my folder structures and permissions and stage the things I need to do so when I power it on for the first time, it's all there and runs. And then if I have scheduled tasks or cron jobs that I want to run, I want to get those set up as well. So things like nightly update checks and things like that. So these become real self-maintaining appliances. All get set up in this Packer job. Then I export it to OVF, and in a post-processor step, I create an OVA file and I inject all my OVF properties. Now, over time, I was able to build this into a Jenkins pipeline, so now it just really becomes a one-button push operation that takes about 45 minutes to complete. So I mentioned Debian wasn't the first place I started. I did actually start this using Photon, but over time, Java dependencies became an issue, right? I mean, who hasn't heard Java dependencies as an issue for enterprise apps before? Right? Unheard of, never, right? So, what did I learn with Packer? So, what's really nice is because I had base templates to start with and I was able to modify what somebody else worked with, I was able to easily take those and turn them into, well, not easily, but extending them into customized application templates was less of a challenge because I already had a base OS that worked. All I was doing was extending it. The second thing that I learned is I was only limited really by two things. What I couldn't script and what the lawyers told me I couldn't do. And then the Packer post-processor is such an amazing tool because it gives you a lot of flexibility. I was able to go beyond just adding OVA files to my post-process, or turning it into an OVA file and adding the properties as a post-processor step to actually uploading it to a content library. So it really became a hands-off workflow by using that post-processor and learning how to have it execute scripts against various endpoints, right? So it's really an all-in-one orchestration tool. Now, I mentioned earlier the examples and samples aren't very approachable, and they were kind of a double-edged sword, right? Because there's a lot of them out there, but they were hard to consume. The reason for this is because the samples that are out there, especially the newer ones that focus on the HashiCorp HCL language that they use now, are entirely variable driven, right? You will pull up some of these in GitHub and you're really not seeing what it's doing because it's just references to variables that are in other files. Now, this isn't necessarily a bad thing. It gives you a lot of flexibility, but it's really intimidating to learn. And there aren't a lot of good examples that show, oh, here's how I start by hard coding things in, and then extend it to different variable files. So I struggled a lot with that early on, especially when I started converting my older templates to the newer format and getting things entered correctly. So when you start working with Packer, you really need to experiment. You need to take your time and start by hard coding things and then moving things out into different variable files. Because there's a lot you can do there. There's a lot of flexibility you can gain, but it's a struggle. Now, the next thing is OVF properties are absolutely amazing. So the QR code here goes to a blog post by William Lamb. He has a lot of content on using Packer to build OVF templates and OVA templates and using them for virtual appliances. This is just one of his posts on it. He's got links in there to a whole series of things that walk through how to use Packer to install Photon, how to create your OVF application properties, how to inject them, etc. So OVF properties, they're key value pairs that are defined outside of the VM. They're defined during deployment time, but they're accessible inside the VM using VMware tools. So VMware tools can run a command and it can retrieve all these values that you can then process to configure anything in the system, really. Now, typically, these are used for things like your passwords, right? Your root password, your sysadmin password, your SSH keys, networking details. But they can also be extended to focus on application properties. I'm going to show you an example of that here. So when you define your OVF properties and to inject into an OVA file, it's an XML file. And we can create multiple properties. We can group properties into specific menu areas and define what they are. We say what type it is, whether, is it Boolean, is it string, is it a number? And we can say whether or not there is a default value to it. So we can do this for anything that we want to configure in our appliance, in our application. So coming back to the topic of Minecraft, how do I use this? So I have my OVF properties. It defines everything I want to configure. Now, when I start up the VM for the first time, it's going to install Minecraft automatically based on the version I define. It's going to pull it down, get everything configured. Then I'm going to pull in all my OVF properties that I want to configure. It's going to store them in variables on the machine. And then for each item, I'm basically going to iterate through it. And for this one, all I'm basically doing is using the sed command to do a find replace inside the properties or the files that I want to update. But the really nice thing is this can be updated and configured for anything you want to do. If you have applications, for instance, that you're frequently deploying and maintaining, you could do something like this. You could build a virtual appliance that configures those applications. Now, I apologize. This is very much an eye chart. So for those of you in the back, I hope you brought your opera glasses. But this is just kind of showing, right? The first is how I retrieve those variables. I'm using the VMware tools command to get to get all my guest info, and then grep for a certain thing and storing it as a variable. The second side is showing how I'm using sed to find that item in my server properties file and change it based on what that variable is. So what this gets me is a fully configured Minecraft server before my kids even realize it's deployed, right? Without having to touch anything or go into a file or touch a command line. Now, when you set those OVF properties, you can also view these in vCenter. Under the configuration tab, there's a vApp options. It's all the way at the bottom of that menu, and you can see all of those properties from vCenter and what you configured them as. So how do you make this your own, right? Well, first thing, right, like anything we do in IT that we want to automate, we have to think about our desired outcome, right? My desired outcome was to be lazy and give my kids something at the same time, right? For an enterprise environment, it might be making things easier for developers or templatizing things that you're doing in your environment or trying to become an internal cloud provider. Then you got to think about your workflow and document it, right? Any automation project starts with documentation. You have to know what you're going to do and have that down on paper so you can script it. And then you need to script, and as I was doing this, test frequently, and then test again, and then wait till it breaks and test again. Now, I realize some of this talked about some things that I have coded. I do not have a public GitHub repo for this, unfortunately. There will be one, but I have to burn it down and start over because at some point in the history of this project, I had credentials in some of the files that have now since been pulled out and moved into variables and aren't stored there. But unfortunately, it's in the history, so yeah, that would be a bad thing, right? So there will be a public GitHub repo coming for this, and it will be up on my blog at some point in the future. So with that, thank you for coming. If you have questions, comments, I will be over on the side somewhere, wherever Alistair tells me to go, back there. But thank you for coming, and I hope this was helpful.